I wonder if you've ever had the experience of writing a letter of recommendation. Writing a letter of recommendation is a tricky thing. Teachers do this all the time. Employers do this often. The challenge of writing a letter of recommendation is that sometimes you are worried about telling the truth, right? Because if you tell the truth, you might get in some trouble. In today's litigious society, you might even get sued if you tell the truth. So there is a professor at Lehigh University named Robert Thornton. And Robert Thornton wanted to help people out in this situation. And so he has a collection of virtually litigation-proof phrases to include in your letters of reference for folks that are of questionable caliber. And he calls this compilation of phrases the lexicon of intentionally ambiguous recommendations. LIAR, okay? So, let me give you a few examples. To describe a candidate who didn't get much work done when they worked for you, quote, I can assure you that no person would be better for the job. Get it? Yeah? Okay, a little bit of delay. All right. To describe an applicant not even worth consideration, quote, I would urge you to waste no time in making this candidate an offer of employment. To describe a person who had problems getting along with their coworkers, quote, I am pleased to say this candidate is a former colleague of mine. And then to describe someone who was particularly unskilled or inept, quote, I enthusiastically recommend this candidate with no qualifications whatsoever. So good. I jest, but I think that this conversation of the truth we tell and how we tell it is far more important than we realize. And its significance spans far beyond the questions of legal consequences. They have deep spiritual consequences for us. We've been in this conversation in the last few weeks about spiritual warfare, how we use our authority to speak on God's behalf in this context of this great spiritual conflict we find ourselves between God and his forces and Satan and his. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the book of Job. And we said one of the tools the enemy uses in this great spiritual conflict is suffering, right? The enemy inflicts suffering on us to try to pull us away from faithfulness. But I think here in Genesis 3, we see another strategy of the enemy, and I think maybe the primary strategy of the enemy in this great spiritual warfare, and it's truth warfare. Truth warfare is, in so many ways, at the heart of our great spiritual conflict. There's a book I really enjoyed called The Deconstruction of Christianity, and in it, the authors talk about this very topic, and they say this: many Christians misunderstand spiritual warfare as referring only to power encounters with demonic spirits. Of course, there is some of that, but the fundamental nature of spiritual warfare is not power encounters, it's truth encounters. It's a battle of ideas. Here he quotes Paul, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ, writes the Apostle Paul about the weapons of our warfare. The Bible also tells us that our enemy is not any group of people, but rather, as Amanda told us last week, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Jesus tells us about this enemy called the devil, whom he describes as a murderer from the beginning, in whom there is no truth at all. Jesus says, when he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. In fact, he is the deceiver of the whole world. Notice how the battlefield is in the realm of opinions, knowledge of God, arguments, and thoughts. As Christians, the primary weapon of our warfare is truth. If we want to stand against the schemes of the devil, we must put on the whole armor of God, which begins with the belt of truth. We need to be vigilant to resist, oppose, and refute false ideas while remaining loving and compassionate towards the people who are being taken captive by them. This is such an incredibly important idea for us that it is around the topic of truth that our primary spiritual conflicts will take place. Hey, let me do a quick sidebar. I know that sometimes fighting for truth can become problematic. There are times when we get so consumed with fighting for all truth that we forget that some truths are more important than others. If the house is on fire, the truth you need to communicate is we need to leave. And arguing about who set the house on fire is not important in that moment, right? And so I do recognize that sometimes we as Christians can be, in our litigious society, so argumentative and so invested in always being right that we sometimes can miss the opportunity to defend the most important truths well. So I want to think about what those most important truths are this morning. And I want to begin using Genesis as a blueprint for the enemy strategy, and then 2 Corinthians as a blueprint for our response in Christ. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, very familiar passage for us. I hope you noticed a few things in this passage. I hope you noticed, first of all, that the first step of the enemy, and he really only has two steps in this whole story. The first step of the enemy is to sow distrust. The first step of the enemy is to sow distrust. He says, the serpent says to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? Yes or no? No, he did not. No, he did not. And the woman knows it, right? Notice the woman's response. Though she says, "We may eat from any fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." Is that what God said? No, it's not, right? She added that whole thing about touching it. Not in the commandment that God gave Adam earlier. By the way, we don't know if that's because Eve got confused or if Adam is a bad communicator, but we just know something's confused. Here's what I want you to notice. This question, did God really say? It's kind of a evilly brilliant question, isn't it? Satan doesn't begin by saying, "Hey, that God you know who made you, who loves you, gave you everything, he's a liar, forget about him." No, Satan says, "I'm just going to sow some distrust. I want to make you begin to question, did he really say you can't eat from anything?" The intent here is to just start inserting some doubt, not only about what God said, but about God's intentions for what he said. Right? I mean, why would he say something like that? Why would God put limits on you? Why would God not allow you to have all the fruit and all the trees that you would ever want? Does God really care about you? This idea of introducing distrust is where temptation begins. I want to make another sidebar here. There's a difference between distrust, sometimes we call this unbelief, distrust, doubt. Doubt's not bad. Doubt's good. Doubt's part of every human relationship. Doubt leads to good questions, and good questions are those that are seeking answers. For example, "Honey, this morning when you left for work, you seemed upset, and I'm just wondering if you're okay, if there's anything I did that I can apologize for or make it better." Hey, I got a little doubt in this relationship. Something's not right here, and I'm not sure why. And I'm going to ask a good question because I'm looking for an answer. Distrust is about bad questions whose purpose is to avoid understanding. "Honey, what the heck is wrong with you? Why were you such a jerk this morning?" That's not a question seeking understanding, right? It's a question seeking to avoid it. It's not about doubt, it's about distrust. Did God really say? Gosh, what a brilliantly evil question. Did God really say that I should forgive everyone? Surely he doesn't expect me to forgive that person in this situation. Did God really say that I'm supposed to be faithful? Surely he doesn't expect me to be faithful through this kind of suffering. Did God really say I'm supposed to be chaste and pure? Surely he doesn't expect me to lose my boyfriend or my girlfriend because I set up some boundaries that the rest of our culture doesn't even recognize. Did God really say? Yeah, what I want you to notice is at this point in the temptation, we've not completely admitted to ourselves even what we're doing, right? At this point, we think we still believe, we just think we're not practicing well. Right? But untruth festers and fosters distrust, first of each other and ultimately of God. And then we get to step 2 of the enemy's plan. Step 2, he says, did God really say? And they say, no, this is what God says. They don't quite get it right. Then the serpent says to the woman, you will not die. Right? God said you will die. You will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Step 1 is to sow distrust. Step 2 is to sow defiance. Right? We've gone from saying, I'm not sure that's what God really wants, to saying, I don't care what God really wants. I have a better idea than God does about what would be good for me, and I want it now. And by the way, Satan is absolutely the king of instant gratification and the avoidance of long-term consequences. Satan says, hey, you're not going to die. And they don't die when they eat the apple. Not right away, because God has mercy on them, right? And God clothes them, but they are kicked out of his presence. And they do die, and they bring death in the world, and they bring this separation from God and our eternal death. And yet, none of that matters because in the moment it feels so good. We do this all the time, right? We move from distrust to defiance, and we say, I know that God says that I should have compassion, but he's wrong. This store clerk is unbelievable, and it's going to feel so good to yell at them, and so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to feel great about it. I'm going to sleep with this person. I'm going to sneak out with this thing I didn't buy. I'm going to watch this inappropriate video. I'm going to stay up late. I'm going to eat junk food. I'm going to slack off in class or at work, etc. Because I know better than God what's good and bad for me. And if God says those things are bad, then God is a liar. Right? And if God thinks that, I want nothing to do with him. You see how quickly we go down this path? Right? Just happens before we realize it. Right? Distrust leads to defiance. So let's talk about what we're supposed to do. Amanda said last week that we are spiritual warriors. Along with the angels, we're supposed to be spiritual warriors, and she's 100% right. So what does it mean for us to be spiritual warriors in this battlefield of truth? Well, the first thing is that it matters how we live our lives. Right? It matters how we behave. It's not just about what we say, it's about what we do. We had some conversation about this a few weeks ago about living an authentic life. I love this passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul is defending himself because people think he's too humble. And Paul says, hey, you know what? I am trying to be humble because Jesus is meek and gentle and humble. Boy, we don't have time to go into this in detail, but it's helpful to remember this is like an honor-shame culture. We don't really have much of an honor-shame culture in the West anymore, but think about a place like Japan, right? Japan, even to today, really still has an honor-shame culture. Part of that may be that Japan's one of the least Christianized nations in the world. The way that they think about status is not dissimilar to the way the Romans and the Greeks and really the whole world thought about status at the time of the New Testament. You remember stories from World War II of kamikazes, of Japanese soldiers holding grenades and lying amongst the midst of the wounded to blow up medics when they came to treat them, of charging machine gun nests with swords and throwing their lives away, right? And all of this comes from this idea of honor. That more important than anything is the respect that I have and my family has in my name and my character. And I have to defend that honor at all costs. That's how the Greeks and the Romans thought about it. Go read the Iliad, right? That's Achilles' whole goal is he wants to be known as this famous man of honor. And here's Paul saying, hey, I don't need to be honored. I don't need any special treatment. I don't need you to bow and scrape before me. In fact, it's my privilege to serve you. It's my privilege to bring you the gospel at no cost. It's my privilege to make myself smaller so you can be greater. And the people say, what are you doing? And Paul says, hey, you know what? The truth of Jesus has so compelled me that I live my life in light of it. That for me, because of who Jesus is, humility doesn't mean weakness. Jesus was humble with ultimate power. Humility is recognizing that all the honor and shame that matters is ascribed to me from God, not from man. And it comes from a life modeled by Jesus and not by Caesar. Paul says, hey, I know the whole world is telling me that this is how the world works and this is what's true and this is how I should behave, but I want you guys to recognize that I don't trust them. I'm going to trust Jesus instead. It's like he's like Clark Kent, right? Remember Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for the Daily Planet? He's mild-mannered, guys, he is mild-mannered. Why? Because he is completely, supremely unconcerned about what people think of him. He's supremely unconcerned about what people might do to him. He doesn't feel threatened by anything anyone ever does. And so he's able to just say, hey, you know what? I can be humble because you have no power over me. That's Jesus. That's Paul. He says, I don't believe the lies the world's telling me. I'm going to live my life filtered through the gospel truth of the story of Jesus. And this is what we're called to do. We're called to filter our experiences and our emotions and our lives through that truth. And here's how that happens. I think really two very simple, important steps that all come down to how we respond to temptation, to the lies, to the enemy. The first is, Paul says, we have power to demolish strongholds. Divine power to demolish strongholds, to destroy arguments, and every proud obstacle raised up against the knowledge of God. Paul wants us to recognize that when the enemy comes sowing distrust and defiance, we respond by saying, hey, I will not fall into your trap. I will not immerse myself in your dishonesty. There was a true story from the 1900s. A guy named George Riddell purchased a newspaper in England called the News of the World, which was still in publication until I think 2011. News of the World was a little bit like a National Enquirer for England, and they did a lot of sensational things. They really focused a lot on crime and sex and scandals, and that was really their bread and butter. So the story is that George Riddell, after he acquired News of the World, somehow met another British journalist, a well-known guy named Frederick Greenwood. One day these guys met, and Greenwood's job came up, and George said, oh, you know what? I own a newspaper. You work for a newspaper. Can I send you a copy of mine sometimes? It's called the News of the World, and I'll mail you a copy. And so he did. Sometime later, they met again, and Riddell asked Greenwood what he thought of his newspaper. And Greenwood said this, quote, I looked at it, and then I put it in the wastepaper basket. And then I thought, if I leave it there, the housekeeper might pick it up and read it, so I burned it. There was an old commercial for V8, and the tagline was, put good in, get good out. Remember these commercials? They would walk sideways until they drank the V8 and then they'd walk up front. That's what Paul's saying, right? He's saying, hey, if you put bad in, you'll get bad out. If you surround your life with untruth, with the lies that seem compelling, with the idea that sort of trash of that newspaper matters, with the idea that you can attain the impossible standards of success that you see on your friend's social media, or if you believe that the casual sex and violence of TV and movies is a great thing, or if you believe that video games offer the real route for meaning and success in your life, or if, all of these things are just these lies that inoculate us. And Paul says, hey, we have to destroy some of those arguments. We have to destroy some of those strongholds. We have to stop filling our minds full of those sorts of lies. And this means, guys, sometimes it means big steps. We're doing a class on the anxious generation and the effect of technology on our kids. Sometimes this means we say, hey, you know what? I'm getting rid of my social media account. I just don't need it anymore. I know it's nice to know where so-and-so went on vacation last year, and it's nice to know when Susie Q has a new baby picture, but I'll find it some other way. and the balance of what I receive there is negative and it just needs to go away. That might not be the case for you. It was the case for me. That's why I don't have Facebook anymore. We might have to take some big swings to say, hey, like, I am not going to let the lies of this world, the temptations of this world overwhelm my mind. I'm going to demolish some strongholds. The other thing that Paul says that's really important, not just that we have to protect ourselves from the dishonest, the distrustful, the defiant temptations. He also says we take every thought captive to obey Christ. Such an interesting idea. I think about all of the lies that people tell themselves or are told by others that keep them imprisoned. I can do it myself. I don't have a problem. No one loves me. More will make me happier. There is no God. To be a person of spiritual authority means to be a person who's passionate about the ability of the truth to set people free from those kinds of lies. And I believe that we cannot begin the process of setting other people free until we are free ourselves. We have to be a people that take every thought captive to Christ, meaning speaking Jesus' truth in the face of Satan's lies in our lives. I came across a little video that does just this, that shares one of the lies we're told and then a truth from Scripture. And I just want to play that for you for a moment. This morning, I want to ask you to do a little assessment. I want you to assess where are those places where the world or the enemy or the flesh has tempted you towards distrust or defiance. I want to ask you, where are those places where you need to, with your life, begin to live in light of the gospel truth of Jesus? Where are those places where there are strongholds that need to be torn down? And what are the lies that you've been told that you have to take captive through Christ? And I believe as we begin to be a people who proclaim God's truth to ourselves, then we begin to have the ability to proclaim God's truth to the church, and then become a people who can proclaim God's truth to the world. That's what spiritual warfare looks like, brothers and sisters. Let's be a people of God's truth tellers today. Thanks be to Him. Amen.